morning. My name is Penn Badgley, and I'm honored to be here today with you to help bring attention to international religious freedom. So I'm a Baha'i, and as a Baha'i, I have been acutely aware of the ongoing persecution of the Baha'is in Iran, as well as other religious minorities in that country. There are currently over 90 Baha'is in prison, the most since January 2018. This is the result of a surge in persecution that began in June of 2022. Most notably, Mahvash Sabet and Fariba Kamalabadi, members of the Baha'i Seven who have already served 10 years in prison for their religious leadership roles, were cruelly resentenced to another 10 years in November 2022. The situation that the Baha'i community faces in Iran is mirrored around the world in countries that simply don't believe in the universal right of religious freedom. The targeted persecution, discriminatory practices, and cruel punishments inflicted on those simply trying to live their own faith is unconscionable. It will take all of us working together as activists, as civil societies, as faith leaders, as government officials, and as people of goodwill to make religious freedom a reality one day, and even more pressing, to free those that are currently facing hostile conditions, prosecutions, and imprisonments. A few of those very people who are shining examples of what it means to work together are here with us today, and I'm proud to present to you our next panel, How Government and Civil Society Can Work Together to Promote Religious Freedom and Tolerance. Thank you.
Next to the stage, panelists, United Kingdom Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief, Fiona Bruce, Director of Outreach at Aid to the Church in Need USA, Edward Clancy, Chaplain of the U.S. Coast Guard, Captain Daniel L. Mode, and Moderator, President of Global Christian Relief, David Curry.
Thank you. And this is the challenge. How do we all cooperate together? And we have some great panelists here today to talk about that issue between government and civil society. How do we make it work? What are the things that we can collaborate on? What are the pitfalls potentially? We'll start with the Honorable Fiona Bruce. Welcome. We're so glad to have you here. A special envoy. Your task is really to connect, sort of connecting tissue between a bunch of different elements here, so this is appropriate for you. What have you seen that works between the civil society and government in your experience in negotiating around the world?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to be here. I'd like to speak from the perspective of having the privilege at the moment of being chair of the International Religious Freedom or Belief Alliance, and this is an alliance of 42 countries whose governments have committed to promoting and defending freedom of religion or belief around the world to Article 18 of the Declaration of Human Rights. And so our representatives, and each country has to specify and name a representative. We work together, and I'm the UK representative, but we can't do what we do as government representatives without civil society. And so we have a council of experts, almost 40 experts from around the world, leaders of international NGOs, academics, writers, and those who have great experience, and they will bring to us issues of concern, cases of concern, so that we can raise them and so that we can challenge the situation internationally and work together as countries, as governments. Let me give you, if I may, one example. And it's the issue that some countries still have on their statute books the death penalty for blasphemy. Right. And so civil society has drawn this to our attention, for example, through a very concerning case of a 19-year-old singer in Nigeria who's been convicted and is appealing against the death sentence for blasphemy, simply for putting something on social media. So our 42 countries have highlighted this. We've put out a statement, but at the same time, Two of our countries, Australia and Costa Rica, are also taking this issue to the United Nations General Assembly to see how this law can be changed and how it can be highlighted that this is unjust. A couple of other quick examples, if I may. In London, we held the ministerial this last year. In July, we had 88 governments came. But in planning that ministerial, right from the start, we set up a working group with civil society organisations to ask them, what are the themes, what are the issues that you want to highlight during this ministerial? And so they brought forward things like early warning signs for atrocity prevention or education, and that's really what we base that conference on. And then before the conference, my Deputy Special Envoy and I, David Burrows, he's here today, we actually travelled across the UK to about 20 towns and cities, holding town hall style meetings just to raise the issue of freedom of religion or belief and raise awareness in the UK. So many people came to us afterwards and said, I had no idea this was happening across the world. But the only way we could do that, the only way we could fill the halls was because civil society organisations and NGOs working in the field actually encouraged people to come along. So many different ways without which we as government representatives couldn't possibly do what we want to do in this field.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. There is a great, I think, sense that there's a lot of activity, and sometimes it's hard to know on the civil society side if you're making any progress. What recommendations would you say to folks out here who want to connect with policymakers, we all want an effective outcome, but it's sometimes hard to know which levers to push and pull and so forth. What can we do to be more effective in helping policymakers move this issue forward?
Well, one thing I would suggest you do is to develop a relationship with policymakers, a relationship of trust. So it's very important that when advocacy is being presented, when evidence is being presented, that it is absolutely trustworthy. When I stand up in Parliament, I want to be sure that what I'm saying is accurate. So that's the first thing I would say. But develop relationships, not only with government department staff working in this field, but also don't forget elected representatives, parliamentarians. I came into this field because I was encouraged when I was elected to Parliament about 12 years ago by civil society. First of all, Mervyn Thomas of Christian Solidarity Worldwide, the founder, and he's here today, he called me up. I was a new MP, and he said, can I come and have a chat with you? And inspired me, and we've been working together ever since. And then also, very shortly after I was elected, Aid to the Church in Need, who worked with Lord Alton, I was invited to the release of their annual report. And I was horrified to hear of what was going on in the world to people simply on account of what they believed. And that inspired me. And as a result of that, other parliamentarians, other MPs who were also inspired, we got together in the UK. We formed the all-party parliamentary group. That group now has 170 members in Parliament. And we put questions to ministers, we raised debates. And as a result of that, our Foreign Secretary a few years ago, Jeremy Hunt, he actually inspired the production of the Truro Review, which in turn made 22 recommendations, including the appointment of an envoy, which is now the office I have the privilege of holding. So parliamentarians highlighting things in Parliament, bringing them to the public attention, not just nationally but internationally, can be very, very powerful. The other thing I would say is if there's a roundtable, in the UK it's called the UK Full Forum, civil society should join, because government do take part, government do go along. I attend every meeting of our roundtable, our forum. We have over 70 organisations now involved, and I will always be taking back to the Foreign Office issues which have been raised. I noticed I had the privilege of being a part of the IRF roundtable here earlier this week, and their State Department staff were there. I could see listening. In the Czech Republic, my vice chair on the International Religious Freedom or Belief Alliance Ambassador Robert Rehak, he has just set up a roundtable based in Prague in the Czech Republic. And there we have 4 countries involved: Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia and Hungary, but also civil society joining. So we had 4 countries joining virtually and civil society there in person. And this dialogue, I think, is really essential if we are going to work effectively together, because we so rely on the stories and the accounts and the evidence from out in the field, which obviously we can't go out and get very often ourselves.
Yeah, wonderful, thank you. Chaplain Mode, now you work with a diverse group of people in the military, obviously, and you have your faith. How do you balance the diversity of viewpoints? We were talking yesterday, I mean, in your experience, you've been all over the world. You were dropped right in the middle of Afghanistan, so you had extremism mixed with the trauma to the soldiers. Talk a little bit about how you balance all of that in your role in the military.
Absolutely. So a little bit of context. What is a Coast Guard chaplain doing being dropped into Afghanistan? Coast Guard chaplains are Navy chaplains. Navy chaplains serve all the maritime services. So I've served the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Coast Guard. During my time in Afghanistan was with the Marine Corps. So bottom line, I have 45 different uniforms in my closet. Central Casting can call me anytime. How do I do it? How does any of our chaplains? I'm proud to kind of represent today about 3,000 active duty chaplains in the Army, the Air Force, the Space Force, the Marine Corps, the Navy, and the Coast Guard. 157 chaplains in the Coast Guard. And all of us come from a very diverse background of religions.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. We model it ourselves. We are pluralistic in the sense of our community. But we all have our faith. I'm a Roman Catholic priest, and I'm called to provide that Roman Catholic coverage wherever I'm at, like Afghanistan. There, I moved every 2.5 days over almost 2 years, 22 months, in 51 different forward operating bases. How do we care for people all over Afghanistan, in this case, in a war zone? We move. We're kind of missionaries in that sense. Yeah. We're constantly on the go to be able to provide spiritual care and provision, our own provision, in my case, Roman Catholic. But also I often travel with other chaplains, whether a rabbi, a Protestant chaplain, sometimes an imam chaplain, so that we could provide that. The other interesting thing is we facilitate. So a person comes to me of another faith, I can't provide for that faith, but I can facilitate for that faith. So a person, Baha'i or Hindu, would like a spiritual book or spiritual items. I can procure those. And also we can raise up lay leaders. So men and women who serve our armed forces, we can train not in their religion, but train to be lay leaders so that they can provide for their community, whether they're deployed wherever they are. Afghanistan is just one example. Imagine this. I've served on 2 different aircraft carriers and 1 flagship of the 7th Fleet. So I have 7 years of sea time. I've not only served on those ships, so aircraft carriers are like cities, right? And we have 4 chaplains, and we're constantly running services in a chapel there. But what about all the other sister ships that we have, our cruisers and destroyers? Well, we fly to those ships. We call it the Holy Helo. So here we are flying and launching in, if you will, to other ships so that we can provide that care. I've been on 49 different ships at sea, deployed, offering ministry. The other point I'll make is that oftentimes people are coming to us not for necessarily spiritual provision, like Mass or a facilitation of their own faith background, but just need an ear.
Yeah.
They need care. And they're coming to us with a whole variety of issues. Some of it has to do with religion, a lot it doesn't. They're living lives out there, and these are young men and women, a lot of times 18, 19-year-olds who are sent overseas for the first time. Imagine that.
Give us a picture of that, because when you're giving spiritual comfort to these folks in a forward operating base, I mean, what is that like in the dark hour?
Sure.
With those folks?
So obviously, I've counseled with people who've had to pull the trigger, who've seen their battle buddy killed. I've been there. I've seen a battle buddy killed. 36 different souls on my watch in Afghanistan died, including the group of Navy SEALs in 2005, the book The Lone Survivor, Marcus Luttrell's book. I was their chaplain. Wow. So how do you deal with those Navy SEALs after a traumatic event where they've lost their largest loss of life of Navy SEALs in their history of 42 years at that time? Powerful. Yeah. The first thing is you're with them. You're just with them. You're there. You don't want to start preaching. You're just there. And so we're embedded with them. We wear the same uniform. We eat the same food. We're dealing with the same heat. And we're just there.
Regardless of their faith, you're there to
right.
comfort, walk.
Or no faith.
Yeah.
And one of the key things that chaplains have that's unique to chaplains, as opposed to anybody else in the military service, we have 100% complete confidentiality. Anything that's said to us stays with us.
That's great.
That service member owns the confidentiality. We don't report it to higher. So let's say you were to go to a doctor. There are certain things they have to report because you might be medically unqualified to go back out, or a psychologist. But chaplains have that complete confidentiality. So there's a sacred space there, if you will, for those conversations to happen. And it's hard, but you're there. And they see you with them, embedded with them, dealing with the same struggles, willing to be that ear for them.
I love that.
And that's a part of our care.
Thank you so much for serving those men and women. Edward, if I could ask you, you've been all over the world, Iraq, Syria, all these places that you work. Where have you seen a breakdown between government and civil society? Where has it been challenged, and where there can be points of learning?
I think a good example would be what is happening now in Nigeria, which might be considered a place of both a breakdown and a success. Yesterday there was the Restoration of Religious Freedom resolution put forth at Congress, calling for certain actions. And what happened there was we had civil society act from the ground up, as John Paul II would have called subsidiarity, feeding government leaders with information and be able to tell what's going on the ground. And it's a very important principle in the Catholic Church that all people are given the opportunity to express their faith, to worship as they are called to. And so, when Aids to the Church in Need, which happens to be a foundation of papal right, which means we're directly under the Holy See, we take it very seriously to provide these voices, to provide the information from the ground up. And so when church leaders, when bishops and priests and nuns, and even just the lay faithful tell us what's going on there, what we have to do as our responsibility is we have to provide that to those who will listen, and oftentimes it is government leaders. And there has been some hesitancy. We've seen a lot of violence against Christians in Nigeria in the last 15 years, especially. Nigeria is the place where more Christians are martyred for their faith than anywhere in the world, 80, 90%. And sometimes those numbers are so big that you lose fact that there are people there. And one of the things that we do is we tell stories. We find individuals who have gone through something. Recently, Father Isaac, who was a priest in Niger State, was attacked and killed. And what people might not know about him is that is the third time that he's been attacked. He survived a firebombing about 10, 12 years ago, and then he was abducted and beaten, I guess about 4 or 5 years ago. And then finally he was killed. And as I was saying to the chaplain, the principle in the military is on the third wound, you get to go home.
All right.
And so Father Isaac went home. And so for us, this need for the people to be ministered to, the people to worship, and the opportunity is very important. So it's important for us to supply the information to those who will hear in the government world, but also the lay people who can also influence from the ground up.
That's powerful. That's powerful. I want to just ask one question. We just have a few minutes left to each of you. How has your experience with religious persecution changed your personal faith? We'll start, has it deepened it? Has it made you more cynical? And I'll start with Edward. Positives and negatives. How has it changed your personal faith?
Positively, I've been inspired by the examples of people who go through so much just to be who they are, just to do what God calls them to do, and at great cost. greater cost than I ever think I would be able to sacrifice. And then on the cynical side, it's in the same sense that the answer to the question previously, that there are so many people in power that seemingly are not aware of it or just don't think of it as important. Or maybe even worse, based upon, say, for example, when I was putting this report together about Nigeria, treated as numbers, not faces, not people.
Right.
You know, the story of Miaramu Joseph, who was abducted at 7 years old and spent 9 years as a prisoner of Boko Haram. And now she can't talk to a man.
Wow. And people can get this report. You have it available?
It will be. This is just a pre-release, but it will be very shortly available, the testimony, yes, at churchinneed.org.
I think for me as a Christian, it's highlighted how precious and special every individual is, that there is no one who God isn't seeing and caring about. There's a wonderful expression too, no insignificant person has ever been born.
Yeah.
And for me, it's been an enormous privilege to work in this field and to be able to promote the dignity of every person God created. And that's been a strengthening to my faith,
That's
as well as a humbling.
Yeah. Well, by the way, thank you. If I could speak on behalf of everybody here, it's not easy. To be the envoy is to be pulled in 1,000 different directions or more. Thank you for being such a strong voice for religious freedom. We greatly appreciate it. I'm going to give you the closing word on this. How has this affected your faith, to see it firsthand?
It's the reason why I'm sitting in this chair today. So my walk with especially international religious freedom began in 2019. I was stationed at the Pentagon in our Chief of Chaplain's office, and I was given my next assignment, which would be the chaplain of the 7th Fleet, which is Indo-PACOM, stationed in Japan, but now caring for having about 51 chaplains, 5 different countries, 50 to 80 ships at any one time. And the Chief of Chaplains, our Admiral, asked me to study religious freedom issues. And so I did a fellowship at the Religious Freedom Institute on Capitol Hill. I spent 7 months studying this. And now the Navy, specifically, is working on doctrine to change how chaplains not only care pastorally for people, but also engage in national security strategy by bringing peace and stability with our role as chaplains, that we can be a unique ambassador, if you will, to meet with religious actors, NGOs, in all the countries that we serve in. I've been in 18 different countries throughout Asia, and in all those countries I've been at religious freedom conferences. I've been in Tibetan monasteries, Buddhist monasteries, just engaging, saying that we care not only as an American government for your security, but also for your peace and stability within your religion. And me being sent as an envoy by my commander has helped with that. So we've developed what we call religious key leader engagement. In 2018, we developed our first guidance for that. In 2020 of February, the Chaplain Corps writ large, which is the Navy and the Marine Corps, developed a strategy for that. And just a few weeks ago, in the 17th of January of 23, the Joint Chiefs of Staff wrote the Strategic Religious Affairs Instruction, which brings that and highlights that. So we're moving in a space which we're able to, as I say, be ambassadors.
To integrate it together.
Exactly.
That's great. That'll have to be the last word. Would you thank our panel, please? Thank you so much.